The Duke wanted a legacy, not a wife, until she collapsed before the court, whispering his name. The morning light slanted through the leaded windows of Eldridge Court, casting long shadows across the marble floor where the Duke of Harrowmere stood in solitary contemplation. Alaric Vane, the seventh to bear the title, regarded the ancestral portrait before him with a grim satisfaction. 7 generations of stern-faced men stared back, their legacy preserved in oils and gilt frames, a testament to bloodlines maintained with ruthless precision. "Your Grace," came the measured voice of Blackwood, his solicitor, from the doorway. "I've brought the documents for your consideration." Alaric did not turn. "The terms are agreeable, most favourable, Your Grace. The Merrin estate brings considerable lands to complement your northern holdings. The young lady's father has accepted all stipulations regarding settlement and dowry." A thin smile crossed the Duke's face as he finally faced the solicitor. "And the lady herself?" "Miss Merrin is said to be of gentle disposition and excellent breeding. She has been educated at finishing schools in both London and Paris. Her connections are impeccable, if not as ancient as Your Grace's. Her health, robust by all accounts. Her mother bore 5 children." Alaric nodded, satisfaction evident in his austere features. At 33 he had delayed marriage long enough. The ducal line required an heir, and with his brother Edmund's recent passing, the burden fell squarely upon his shoulders. "Very well. Arrange the meeting. We shall observe the proper courtship period. 3 months should suffice. And then the announcement." Later that afternoon, Alaric sat in his study, reviewing estate accounts with the detachment of a banker examining ledgers. The Harrowmere estates were vast, but not without their burdens. New blood and new capital would secure the future of a name that had endured since the conquest. The following week brought the first assembly of the season, where county families gathered at Thornfield Hall. Alaric arrived fashionably late, his entrance causing the predictable ripple of whispers and curtsies. Lady Isolde Vernon, the county's most notorious gossip, immediately detached herself from a clutch of matrons to intercept him. "Your Grace," she purred, her smile revealing teeth too perfect to be genuine, "how delightful to see you emerge from solitude. There are several young ladies who would be devastated should you fail to claim a dance." "Lady Vernon," he acknowledged with a shallow bow, "I am not here for frivolity. I understand the Merrin family is in attendance." Her eyes gleamed with malicious interest. "Indeed? How fortuitous that you should mention them. They arrived but half an hour ago." She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "The daughter is a quiet thing. Pretty enough, I suppose, in that insipid way that some gentlemen prefer." Alaric's gaze swept the room until it found its quarry. Lyra Merrin stood near the refreshment table, a vision in pale blue silk. Her posture was perfect, shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, yet there was something vulnerable in her stillness, like a deer sensing danger, but too proud to flee. He approached with measured steps, aware of the eyes following his progress. Social theatre required precision. This first meeting would be dissected in drawing rooms for weeks to come. "Miss Merrin," he said, bowing before her. "Alaric Vane, Duke of Harrowmere." She curtsied, the movement graceful despite the flush that rose to her cheeks. "Your Grace, you honour me with your attention." "The honour is mine," he replied automatically. "I wonder if you might favour me with the next dance." Her grey eyes, flecked with blue, widened slightly. "I would be delighted, Your Grace." As he led her to the floor, he noted her slender hand resting upon his arm, a fragile thing, like a bird. The music began, and they moved together in the formal patterns of the waltz. She danced well, following his lead with perfect compliance. "You are recently returned from Paris, I understand," he said. "Yes, Your Grace. I completed my studies there last winter. And did you find it to your liking?" A genuine smile transformed her face, bringing unexpected warmth to her features. "Very much so. The galleries especially. I spent many hours at the Louvre." "You have an appreciation for art, then?" "For beauty in all its forms," she replied, then looked away as if fearing she had spoken too boldly. The dance ended, and he returned her to her parents with precise courtesy. Later, as his carriage rolled through the darkness toward Eldridge Court, Alaric contemplated the evening with satisfaction. Miss Merrin would serve admirably as Duchess. She was well-bred, healthy, and apparently biddable, precisely what he required to continue the Harrowmere line. What more could a man want in a wife? Love was a luxury for poets and fools. A duke required only a suitable vessel for his legacy. As Eldridge Court appeared on the horizon, its ancient towers silhouetted against the midnight sky, a letter waited on his desk, one that would reveal how grievously he had misjudged the quiet strength behind those grey-blue eyes. The letter lay unsealed upon Alaric's mahogany desk, the wax of his signet ring still warm upon the parchment. He had written to formally request permission to court Lyra Merrin, a courtesy, nothing more, as negotiations were already well advanced. He paused, however, his quill hovering over the direction. What did he truly know of the woman he intended to make his duchess? A quiet knock interrupted his contemplation. "Enter," he commanded, his tone precise as clockwork. Blackwood appeared, his expression grave. "Your Grace, I have received information regarding the Merrin family that may be pertinent to your considerations." Alaric's eyes narrowed. "Speak plainly." "It appears that Lady Merrin's maternal grandmother was," the solicitor hesitated, "of common birth, a shopkeeper's daughter from Bristol." Silence fell like a blade. Alaric rose slowly, his frame casting a long shadow across the Persian carpet. "This was not disclosed in our preliminary inquiries. The connection is distant, Your Grace, and the family has risen considerably in station since. Mr. Merrin himself is beyond reproach. Oxford educated, with substantial holdings. Yet they concealed this detail. What else might they be hiding?" Alaric paced to the window, where morning light spilled across the ancestral gardens. 7 generations of careful breeding, of calculated alliances, and now the spectre of common blood. "The young lady herself appears exemplary," Blackwood ventured. Her deportment at finishing school was praised most highly. The headmistress noted her exceptional poise and scholarly aptitude. Alaric waved a dismissive hand. "Poise and aptitude can be taught. Bloodlines cannot be mended." He turned sharply. "I will proceed with the courtship, but with heightened vigilance. This revelation must not become common knowledge. Lady Vernon would have it spread from London to Edinburgh within a fortnight." The following day brought an invitation to a small gathering at the Merrin estate, Willowbrook Manor. Though modest compared to Eldridge Court, the property boasted well-maintained grounds and a handsome Georgian facade. Alaric arrived precisely on time, observing the house with a critical eye. The entrance hall was tastefully appointed, if lacking the gravitas of truly ancient wealth. Lyra greeted him in the music room, where afternoon light streamed through tall windows. She wore a dress of soft amber that complemented her chestnut hair, which was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. A single strand had escaped, curling against her cheek like a question mark. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying, "we are honored by your visit." "Miss Merrin," he bowed, noting the book that lay open on the pianoforte. "I hope I have not interrupted your studies." A flush crept up her neck. "Poetry, Your Grace." Wordsworth's reflections on nature provide pleasant companionship when one is alone. "I find practical texts more edifying," he replied. "History, economics, agricultural improvement, these have tangible value." She met his gaze directly, something flickering in her eyes that he could not immediately identify. "Perhaps the soul requires nourishment as well as the mind, Your Grace." The boldness of her response surprised him. Here was unexpected steel beneath the composure. "You speak of the soul with conviction, Miss Merrin." "It is the one inheritance we all share equally," she replied, then gestured toward the garden. "Would you care to walk? The roses are particularly fine this season." In the garden they proceeded along gravel paths bordered by immaculate flower beds. Lyra moved with quiet confidence among the blooms, occasionally stopping to admire a particularly perfect specimen. "You have an interest in horticulture?" he inquired. "In creation of all kinds," she answered. "There is something miraculous in nurturing life, don't you think? To see something flourish under one's care." Her words carried an undercurrent that made Alaric unexpectedly conscious of his purpose in courting her. She spoke of nurturing as if it were a sacred act, not merely a biological function. As they rounded a corner, they encountered Mr. Merrin deep in conversation with the head gardener. Upon seeing them, the older man's face brightened considerably. "Your Grace, I see my daughter is showing you our humble grounds." "Indeed, sir, they are most credit to your stewardship." Lyra's father beamed, clearly flattered by the Duke's approval. "We cannot boast the grandeur of Eldridge Court, of course, but we take pride in what we have built here. Built, not inherited." The distinction hung in the air. Alaric inclined his head politely, but his thoughts returned to the revelation of Lyra's grandmother. Common blood had built this estate. Common hands had planted these gardens. The thought disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Later, as tea was served in the drawing-room, Alaric observed Lyra pouring with practiced elegance. Her hands moved with the precision of a ritual, each gesture refined yet natural. When she handed him his cup, Their fingers brushed momentarily. He was struck by their warmth. "Tell me, Miss Merrin, what do you consider the principal duties of a duchess?" he asked, watching her reaction carefully. She set down the teapot with deliberate care. To uphold the dignity of her position through exemplary conduct, to manage the ducal households with efficiency and grace, to support her husband in his responsibilities to crown and country. She paused, then added quietly, "and to ensure the continuation of the family line." Her direct acknowledgement of what was typically left unspoken surprised him. Most young ladies would have demurred or changed the subject. "You speak with unusual frankness," he observed. "I believe clarity prevents later disappointment, Your Grace." Her gaze met his, unwavering. "Marriage is a contract of profound consequence. Both parties should understand precisely what they undertake." As the visit concluded and Alaric took his leave, he found himself oddly disquieted. Lyra Merrin was not quite what he had expected. Beneath her proper exterior lay a mind of unexpected depth and a spirit that seemed to assess him as thoroughly as he evaluated her. In his carriage, rattling back toward Eldridge Court, he recalled the moment her fingers had touched his, that brief, inconsequential contact. He removed his gloves, staring at his bare hand as if it might reveal some trace of the encounter. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 11 as he returned. Ascending the grand staircase, Alaric paused before the portrait of his father, stern, unyielding, perfect in his ducal regalia. "I shall do my duty," he murmured to the painted face. "The line will continue." Yet as he entered his bedchamber, an unbidden thought arose. What kind of eyes would his children inherit? His own cold grey, or her surprising blue-flecked ones, alive with unspoken thoughts? The question followed him into dreams that, for once, were not of ledgers and bloodlines, but of a garden where a single strand of hair curled against a flushed cheek. 3 weeks into their courtship, society had begun to take notice. Whispers followed Alaric and Lyra as they entered Lady Montgomery's summer musicale, her gloved hand resting lightly upon his arm. He felt the weight of speculation in every glance, the silent tallying of advantage and alliance. "The Duke appears quite taken with Miss Merrin," Lady Isolde remarked loudly to her companion as they passed. "How fortunate for her family. I understand their eastern properties suffered dreadfully in last year's floods." Lyra's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his arm, but her expression revealed nothing. They took their seats near the front, where Alaric noted several of his peers eyeing him with newfound interest. The calculated dance of matrimony had begun in earnest. His apparent choice had altered the social landscape. The first performer, a young woman with more enthusiasm than talent, took her place at the pianoforte. As she massacred a Chopin nocturne, Alaric glanced at Lyra, expecting to find the polite mask of boredom that society demanded. Instead, he discovered her listening intently, her eyes soft with something like compassion. "You are generous in your attention," he murmured. "The performance hardly merits such concentration." Lyra turned to him, her voice equally low. "She plays with great feeling, if imperfect technique. I find sincerity more moving than cold perfection." The observation lingered as the afternoon progressed through varying displays of accomplishment. During the interval, they promenaded through Lady Montgomery's conservatory, a jungle of exotic specimens from the Empire's furthest reaches. "Your assessment of sincerity versus perfection," he said, as they paused before a particularly vivid orchid. "Would you apply it beyond musical performance?" Her glance was quick, searching. "In most human endeavors, Your Grace, technical mastery without heart produces little of lasting value. Even in matters of duty and obligation, especially then." Her gaze returned to the orchid, its complex structure seeming to fascinate her. "Duty performed without conviction is like this flower blooming in captivity, correct in form perhaps, but divorced from its true purpose." Alaric frowned slightly. "You speak as if duty itself were insufficient motivation." "Not insufficient, Your Grace, merely incomplete." She reached toward the orchid but stopped short of touching its delicate petals. "May I ask what you seek in marriage, beyond the continuation of your line?" The directness of the question startled him. Ladies of quality typically approached such matters through layers of implication and euphemism. "Compatibility," he answered after a moment. "Harmonious coexistence, a well-ordered household." "And nothing more?" Her voice was soft, but there was a challenge in it that he could not ignore. "What more should there be?" he countered, suddenly aware that they had ventured beyond the boundaries of proper courtship conversation. She turned fully to face him, her expression serious. "Companionship, understanding, growth together through life's seasons. A faint color touched her cheeks, perhaps even affection in time. Alaric studied her, this puzzle of a woman who spoke of duty and heart in the same breath. You harbor romantic notions, Miss Merrin. I harbor hope for a life of meaning, Your Grace. She smiled then, a small private expression. Even dukes must sometimes long for more than ledgers and lineage. Before he could formulate a response, Lady Isolde appeared at the entrance to the conservatory, her eyebrows raised in theatrical surprise. My dears, how positively clandestine you appear, sequestered among the foliage. The second half is about to commence. We mustn't deprive the performers of such an illustrious audience. As they returned to the music room, Alaric noted how Lyra smoothly deflected Lady Isolde's probing questions with gentle humor and redirection. She possessed a social grace that would serve a duchess well, handling the barbed commentary with neither retreat nor retaliation. The following day, Alaric found himself at his desk reviewing correspondence, but his thoughts kept returning to their conversation in the conservatory. Lyra's words had disturbed the careful equilibrium of his plans. He had sought a duchess who would fulfill her role without complication, not one who spoke of affection and meaning as if they were essential rather than incidental. Blackwood arrived with the afternoon post, sorting through papers with practiced efficiency. The settlement negotiations proceed apace, Your Grace. Mr. Merrin has accepted all terms regarding Miss Lyra's dowry and jointure. And what of the grandmother? Alaric asked, his tone sharp. Has there been further disclosure? None of consequence, Your Grace. The connection, while regrettable, is sufficiently remote as to pose minimal risk to any potential heirs. Alaric nodded, relieved yet oddly disappointed. He had half expected, what? That Lyra herself might have mentioned her ancestry, that she would lay bare this family secret as frankly as she spoke of affection and duty. There is one additional matter, Blackwood continued, extracting a particular letter from his case. Lady Harrington writes to inform you that her niece, Lady Caroline Woodridge, returns from Italy next month. She hints rather heavily that the young lady would welcome your attentions. Alaric took the letter, scanning its contents with practiced detachment. Lady Caroline, beautiful, accomplished, with bloodlines as ancient as his own. Until recently, she had seemed the obvious choice for his duchess. Yet now, send a polite acknowledgement, he instructed. Nothing more. That evening, a light rain fell over Eldridge Court, drumming softly against leaded windows. Alaric stood in the portrait gallery, contemplating the faces of his ancestors. 7 generations of Vanes stared back, their expressions united by the same proud bearing, the same cool assessment in their eyes. What would you make of her? He asked the painted figures. This woman who speaks of the soul as if it were as tangible as land and titles? No answer came, save the patter of rain and the distant chime of the clock marking another hour's passage. Alaric moved to the window, watching water stream down ancient glass, distorting the view of gardens his forebears had planted. For the first time, he wondered if they too had stood at this very window, questioning not just whom they should marry, but why. The thought was disturbing enough that he retreated to his study, where ledgers and legal documents offered comforting certainty. Yet even as he worked, a strange restlessness possessed him. He found himself imagining Lyra in this house, not as a possession or an ornament, but as a presence. Would she read poetry in the library, play music in the long, silent drawing room, speak of sincerity and heart beneath these ancient beams? Near midnight, he reached a decision. The courtship would proceed as planned. Lyra Merrin would become his duchess, bringing fresh capital and new life to Eldridge Court. Her peculiar notions about affection would fade with time and duty, as such fancies always did. Yet, as he sealed a letter requesting her presence at the upcoming Harrowmere Harvest Ball, the traditional venue where dukes announced their betrothals, Alaric could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The contract remained the same, but the man signing it had somehow changed. Outside, the rain ceased. In the sudden silence, Alaric thought he heard a distant strain of music, elusive, haunting. He moved to the window and opened it, leaning out to catch the sound. There was nothing, of course, only the drip of water from ancient eaves and the whisper of wind through centuries-old trees. Yet for a moment, he had been certain he heard something more, a melody that spoke of possibilities beyond duty and bloodlines. Alaric closed the window firmly, locking it against the night. Such fancies were beneath a duke. He had chosen his path, and sentiment would not divert him from it. Still, as he retired to his bedchamber, the phantom music seemed to follow, its notes forming words that sounded strangely like Lyra's. Even dukes must sometimes long for more. The Harrowmere Harvest Ball approached with the inexorable certainty of the seasons. Alaric found himself attending to preparations with unusual diligence, inspecting the great ballroom that had remained largely unused since his father's time. Crystal chandeliers were lowered and cleaned, parquet floors polished to a mirror shine, and the Harrowmere silver brought gleaming from its vaults. "The south gallery requires additional candles," he instructed the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, who had served Eldridge Court since before his birth, "and ensure fresh flowers are arranged in the ladies' retiring room." The older woman regarded him with barely concealed surprise. "Of course, Your Grace. Might I inquire if there is to be a special announcement at the ball? The staff should be prepared for any particular celebrations." Alaric straightened his cuffs, avoiding her knowing gaze. "Preparations should be made for all eventualities, Mrs. Winters. 3 days before the ball, a carriage arrived bearing Lyra and her mother for a tour of Eldridge Court. Alaric received them in the grand entrance hall, where marble columns rose to a ceiling adorned with frescoes of vain ancestors ascending to glory. "Welcome to Eldridge Court," he said, bowing over Lady Merrin's hand before turning to Lyra. Something in her expression, a mixture of appreciation and assessment rather than awe, stirred an unexpected desire to know her thoughts. "Miss Merrin, I trust your journey was comfortable." "Most agreeable, Your Grace." Her eyes moved past him to take in the grandeur of the hall. "Your home is magnificent." "The West Wing dates from the Tudor period," he explained, as he led them through a succession of staterooms. "Though most of what you see was reconstructed during the Restoration. The East Gallery houses our collection of Italian masters," Lady Merrin exclaimed appropriately at each revelation of splendor, but Lyra's responses were more measured. She paused before paintings not to admire their frames or provenance, but to study the artistry itself. In the library, her fingers hovered reverently over leather-bound volumes, her expression one of genuine longing. "You may borrow any that interest you," Alaric found himself offering, surprised by his own generosity. Her smile illuminated her face. "You are most kind, Your Grace, though I fear I should require several lifetimes to properly appreciate such a collection." As they continued through the house, Alaric became increasingly aware of showing not just a residence, but a future. Each room they entered, he found himself wondering how Lyra might inhabit it, where she might sit to read, which window might become her favorite vantage point. In the music room, she paused before the grand pianoforte, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon light. "Do you play, Your Grace?" she asked. "I have not touched a keyboard since boyhood," he admitted. "The instrument remains largely for decoration." "What a pity," she murmured, her hand resting lightly on the closed lid. "Music gives voice to what cannot be spoken. Perhaps you would demonstrate." The request escaped him before he could consider its propriety. Lyra glanced at her mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Settling herself at the instrument, she lifted the cover with reverent hands. For a moment she sat perfectly still, as if communing with the silent keys. Then her fingers descended, and Bach flowed into the room, not played with technical brilliance, but with a sincerity that transformed the dusty chamber. Alaric found himself transported by the simple purity of her interpretation. The notes seemed to reach inside him, stirring emotions long dormant, joy, longing, a strange ache that had no name. When she finished, the silence felt sacred. "Forgive my rusty technique," she said softly. "It has been some time since I practiced regularly." "There is nothing to forgive," he replied, his voice unusually rough. "You play with understanding." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, that transcended the careful choreography of their courtship. Lady Merrin's voice broke the spell. "Lyra has always had a particular sensitivity to music. Her father indulged her with the finest instructors, though naturally such accomplishments must take second place to more practical concerns once she is established." "Indeed," Alaric responded automatically, though the thought of silencing Lyra's music suddenly seemed a profound loss. "Shall we continue to the gardens? The late roses are particularly fine this year." As they walked the formal pathways of the Eldridge Gardens, Alaric found himself speaking not of property boundaries and agricultural improvements, but of his own boyhood explorations among these hedges and fountains. Lyra listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed her own love of growing things. "And this ancient oak," she said, pausing beneath a massive tree whose branches spread like protective arms, "how many generations has it witnessed?" "It was already ancient when the first Vane built these walls," Alaric replied, looking up at its canopy. Sometimes I wonder what it would say if trees could speak of what they've seen. Perhaps they do speak, in their way, Lyra suggested, through leaf and limb and root. Perhaps we've simply forgotten how to listen. The observation, so characteristic of her unusual way of seeing, made him smile. You find meaning in curious places, Miss Merrin. Life offers meaning everywhere, Your Grace. One need only be willing to perceive it. When the tour concluded and the Merrin ladies prepared to depart, Alaric found himself reluctant to see them go. At the carriage door, he took Lyra's hand, holding it perhaps a moment longer than propriety dictated. "The harvest ball," he said. "I trust you will attend?" "We have received your kind invitation," she confirmed, her eyes searching his. "It would be our pleasure." As the carriage pulled away, Alaric remained on the steps, watching until it disappeared down the long drive. Something profound had shifted during their visit, something he could neither name nor deny. That evening, as he sat alone in his study, a letter arrived from London. The courier who delivered it wore the livery of the Earl of Westmoreland, Alaric's godfather and oldest family connection. Breaking the seal, Alaric scanned the contents with growing disquiet. "My dear godson," the Earl wrote, "it has come to my attention that you are pursuing an alliance with the Merrin family. While they are certainly respectable, I feel obliged to share certain information that may not have reached your ears. The grandfather, it seems, made his initial fortune through trade, and not the genteel sort, but the rough commerce of colonial goods. More concerning still, there are whispers of involvement in the West Indies sugar trade, with all its unsavory associations." Alaric set the letter down, his jaw tight. Such connections, if widely known, would raise eyebrows in the highest circles. Not insurmountable for a duke, perhaps, but certainly a shadow on the impeccable lineage he had sought to preserve. He rose and moved to the window, staring out at gardens now silvered by moonlight. The ancient oak stood silhouetted against the night sky, its branches moving gently in the breeze. What would it say of him, this tree that had watched generations of Vanes make their choices? The harvest ball was 3 days hence. By tradition, he would announce his betrothal there, before all of county society. Lady Caroline Woodridge had sent word that she would attend, newly returned from Italy, and according to rumour, more beautiful than ever. The Earl would approve such a match wholeheartedly. Yet, when Alaric closed his eyes, he heard not the practical counsel of his godfather, but the pure notes of Bach flowing from Lyra's fingers. He saw not Lady Caroline's famed beauty, but the quiet intelligence in grey-blue eyes that looked at his ancestral home and saw more than wealth and status. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through empty corridors. Alaric returned to his desk and took up his pen. Whatever he decided, there were letters that must be written before dawn broke over Eldridge Court. The quill scratched across parchment as an owl called from the ancient oak, witness to yet another Vane making choices that would echo through generations yet unborn. The night of the harvest ball arrived crisp and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Carriages lined the drive of Eldridge Court, disgorging their passengers into the golden light spilling from its windows. Footmen in Harrowmere livery guided guests up the grand staircase, where Alaric stood receiving the county's finest families. "Your Grace," Lady Isolde purred as she swept past in rustling silk. "What a triumph already! Every person of consequence has abandoned competing engagements to attend your ball." "You honour me with your presence, Lady Vernham," he replied mechanically, his attention divided between courtesy and anticipation. The Merrin carriage had not yet arrived. Lady Caroline Woodridge made a spectacular entrance, her Venetian-inspired gown drawing admiring gasps. She approached Alaric with practiced grace, offering her hand with the confidence of long acquaintance. "Cousin Alaric," she said, invoking a distant connection. "Italy has been utterly transformative, though I confess I've missed English society terribly." "Welcome home, Lady Caroline. I trust you will find much unchanged." Her perfectly arched eyebrow suggested skepticism. "Indeed, I hear whispers that the immovable Duke of Harrowmere himself may have undergone transformation in my absence." Her glance was meaningful. "I look forward to observing these rumoured changes myself." Alaric maintained his composure, though inwardly he bristled at her presumption. Change is the only constant, they say. Even dukes are not exempt from its influence. As she moved on, he caught sight of the Earl of Westmoreland, watching their exchange with evident approval. His godfather approached, clapping him firmly on the shoulder. "A magnificent match she would make," the Earl murmured. "Beauty, breeding, and a fortune that would restore even Eldridge's grandeur. Have you considered my letter? I have read it with the attention it deserves, Alaric replied diplomatically. Excellent. Then I trust tonight's announcement will— The Earl's words faltered as the majordomo's voice rang out. Mr. and Mrs. Merrin, Miss Lyra Merrin. Alaric turned to see Lyra ascending the staircase, a vision in pale gold that caught the candlelight like dawn breaking. She wore no jewels save a simple pendant at her throat, yet she outshone the diamond-draped ladies who preceded her. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot, with tendrils framing her face, that face which now searched the crowd until her eyes found his. Something in his expression must have communicated his pleasure, for her lips curved in a smile of quiet radiance. As she approached, the Earl muttered something about discussing this further, before tactfully withdrawing. "Your Grace," Lyra said, curtsying before him, "you have transformed Eldridge Court into an enchantment." "The transformation is incomplete until now," he replied, the words emerging unbidden. Taking her gloved hand, he raised it to his lips, a gesture more intimate than their previous exchanges. "The first waltz is about to begin. Would you honor me?" Surprise flickered across her face, followed by pleasure. "Nothing would give me greater joy." As Alaric led her to the center of the ballroom, a hush fell over the assembled guests. The Duke's choice of partner for the opening dance was a clear statement of intent. Lady Isolde's fan fluttered with frantic excitement. Lady Caroline's perfect features froze in a mask of composure. The Earl of Westmoreland's expression darkened perceptibly. None of this registered with Alaric as the orchestra struck the first notes. With Lyra in his arms, moving in perfect harmony to the music, the machinations of society receded into insignificance. They danced without speaking, the waltz carrying them across the polished floor in sweeping circles. "You seem troubled," she finally said, her voice pitched for his ears alone. "Has something occurred to distress you?" The question, so direct yet so gentle, pierced his careful reserve. "I received a letter from my godfather concerning your family's history. He mentioned connections to trade that some might consider problematic." He felt her stiffen slightly, though her steps never faltered. "The sugar plantations," she said quietly. "Yes, my grandfather inherited such interests through his first wife's family. When he understood the true nature of those operations, he divested himself of all connections and used much of his fortune to support abolition efforts. It is not a history we celebrate, but neither do we hide from it." Alaric studied her face, finding no evasion there. "You speak of it with remarkable candor. Would you prefer I dissemble?" Her gaze was steady. "The past cannot be undone, Your Grace. We can only choose how we respond to its legacy." As the waltz ended, Alaric bowed over her hand, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "Would you walk with me? There is something I wish to discuss away from prying ears." He led her toward the conservatory, a glass-enclosed garden where exotic palms created secluded alcoves. Guests paused in their conversations to watch their progress, speculation rippling in their wake. Lady Isolde made as if to intercept them, but a single look from Alaric deterred even her formidable determination. In the relative privacy of the conservatory, moonlight filtered through glass panels to cast dappled shadows across stone paths. The air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. "Miss Merrin, Lyra," Alaric began, her given name feeling both foreign and right upon his lips. "I have not been entirely forthcoming about my intentions." Her expression remained composed, though her hand moved unconsciously to the pendant at her throat. "I understand, Your Grace. Your godfather's revelations have naturally altered your considerations." "No," he said quickly. "That is not—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "My intentions toward you were initially pragmatic, a suitable alliance advantageous to both our families. Your dowry would strengthen Eldridge's foundations. My title would elevate your family's standing. A reasonable arrangement," she said softly, though something in her eyes dimmed. "But I find my thoughts have evolved." Alaric paced before her, uncharacteristically unsettled. "When you played Bach in the music room, I heard something I had forgotten existed. When you spoke of the oak tree's witness, you awakened perspectives I had never considered." He stopped, facing her directly. "You asked what I sought in marriage, beyond continuation of my line. I gave you a cold answer, Lyra, an incomplete one." Her breath caught visibly, the rise and fall of her chest quickening beneath gold silk. "And now I find myself wanting precisely what you described: companionship, understanding, the possibility of affection." The admission cost him something of his careful reserve, yet the relief of speaking truth was immense. "I would court you properly, not as a broodmare for the vain lineage, but as a woman whose mind and heart I have come to admire. Lyra's eyes widened, luminous in the moonlight. Your Grace, Alaric, Before she could continue, a commotion erupted at the conservatory entrance. Lady Caroline stood framed in the doorway, her face a study in calculated interruption. "Dear cousin," she called, her voice carrying clearly despite its affected softness. "Forgive my intrusion, but your guests are eagerly anticipating your announcement. The Earl has hinted at momentous news, and speculation runs rampant." Alaric felt Lyra withdraw, her momentary openness replaced by careful dignity. "You must not keep your guests waiting, Your Grace," she said, stepping back from him. "Society will have its due." "Lyra," he began, but she shook her head slightly. "We will speak again," she promised, then moved toward the exit, nodding politely to Lady Caroline as she passed. Left alone with his cousin, Alaric made no effort to hide his displeasure. "Your timing is remarkably precise, Caroline." She approached, trailing fingers along a marble balustrade. "One might say providential." "Really, Alaric, the Merrin girl. I returned from Italy expecting to find you still the model of ducal propriety, only to discover you on the verge of aligning Harrowmere with trade money. The Earl is beside himself." "The Earl is not Duke of Harrowmere," Alaric replied coldly. "Nor are you my keeper." "But I am your friend," she countered, her tone softening. "And friends protect each other from impulsive mistakes. Think carefully before you make any announcements tonight. There are whispers about the Merrin fortune. Sugar plantations, Alaric. Slave labor. Is that the legacy you wish to bind to Harrowmere?" The accusation struck with calculated precision. Alaric felt its weight, even knowing Lyra's explanation. "You overstep, Caroline. Perhaps, but at least hear the Earl out before you decide. He awaits you in your study." She smiled, victory in the curve of her lips. "For the sake of friendship, if nothing else." As Caroline swept away, Alaric remained in the moonlit conservatory, torn between returning to the ball and confronting his godfather. The night that should have culminated in his betrothal had become a battlefield of competing interests and hidden agendas. The jasmine's perfume suddenly seemed cloying, the conservatory's beauty a facade for uglier truths. He thought of Lyra's face when he had spoken of companionship and understanding, the hope and vulnerability there. And he thought of his ancestors, those stern portraits watching from gilded frames, demanding that the vain name remain untainted by scandal. The clock in the great hall struck 10, its resonant chime reaching even the furthest corners of Eldridge Court. Alaric straightened his shoulders and made his decision. Whatever announcement would be made this night, it would be on his terms, not the Earl's, not Caroline's, not even society's. With measured steps, he left the conservatory and headed toward his study, where the past and future waited to stake their competing claims on the present moment. The study door closed behind Alaric with the weight of finality. The Earl of Westmoreland stood before the fireplace, his aristocratic profile outlined by flames that cast more shadow than light. Neither man spoke immediately. The silence stretched taut between them. "Your godmother would be gravely disappointed," the Earl finally said, his voice quiet yet cutting, "she who traced her lineage to William the Conqueror himself." "My godmother was also known for her compassion and discernment," Alaric countered, moving to stand opposite the older man. "Qualities I find lacking in your interference tonight." The Earl's eyebrows rose. "Interference? I have merely provided information vital to your decision-making. Information, I might add, that the Merrins themselves saw fit to obscure." "They obscured nothing. Miss Merrin addressed the matter with complete transparency when I raised it." "After being confronted, yes." The Earl extracted a folded document from his coat. "But there is more. Your solicitor, while thorough in many respects, failed to discover this." Alaric accepted the paper with reluctance. Unfolding it, he found himself looking at a newspaper clipping dated some 15 years earlier. The headline blared, "Merrin imports linked to slave-produced goods. Her grandfather claimed ignorance," the Earl continued, as Alaric scanned the article. "Divested himself publicly, made charitable donations to assuage his conscience. But the fortune that provides Miss Lyra's dowry was built on such trade. Is that a stain you wish to introduce to the Harrowmere line?" Alaric set the clipping aside, his expression carefully controlled. "The sins of the grandfather are not the responsibility of the granddaughter. Perhaps not morally, but socially. The taint remains, Alaric. Lady Caroline, by contrast, offers impeccable bloodlines and connections that would strengthen Harrowmere's position at court. I am not discussing Lady Caroline." "Then let us discuss your duty." The Earl's tone hardened. 7 generations of Vanes have preserved this title, these lands, this name. Would you risk all for a momentary infatuation? The girl is pretty enough, I grant you, and apparently possesses some charm. But a duchess requires more than charm. She requires irreproachable ancestry. Alaric turned away, pacing the length of the study. Outside, music and laughter filtered from the ballroom, the sound of society celebrating while deeper currents ran beneath its glittering surface. You speak as if lineage alone determines worth. For a duke, it does. The Earl moved to Alaric's desk, where the brandy decanter stood. Pouring 2 glasses, he offered one to his godson. I have watched you grow from boy to man, Alaric. I promised your father I would guide you in his absence. He would expect me to speak plainly now. Miss Merryn cannot be Duchess of Harrowmere. Alaric accepted the brandy but did not drink. Because of events that occurred before her birth? Because her grandfather once owned interests in morally reprehensible commerce, which he later denounced and made reparations for? Because perception shapes reality in our world. The Earl sipped his drink, his tone gentler now. I do not question the girl's personal qualities, but a duchess is not merely a wife. She is a symbol, an embodiment of the title she bears. Every eye will scrutinize her. Every tongue will whisper of her origins. And if I find such scrutiny irrelevant to my choice, then you place personal desire above dynastic responsibility. The Earl set his glass down with deliberate care. Something no Vane has done in 7 generations. The accusation hung in the air, weighted with centuries of expectation. Alaric moved to the window, staring out at grounds now silvered by moonlight. The ancient oak stood sentinel in the distance, its branches reaching toward stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. What was duty, truly? To perpetuate a bloodline regardless of the soul's yearnings. To choose cold perfection over sincere feeling as Lyra had once framed it. The announcement is expected within the hour, the Earl said into the lengthening silence. Lady Caroline stands ready to accept your suit, should you make the wise choice. Alaric turned, facing his godfather squarely. And if I choose otherwise, the older man's face hardened, then you place me in an impossible position. The West Indies connection could remain buried, or it could become common knowledge. Society forgets nothing, Alaric, when properly reminded. The threat, for all its careful phrasing, was unmistakable. Alaric felt cold anger rise within him. You would blackmail me into compliance? You who claim to honor my father's memory? I would save you from yourself, the Earl retorted, as he would have done. A knock at the study door interrupted their confrontation. Without waiting for permission, Mrs. Winters entered, her usually composed features marked by distress. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Miss Merryn has taken ill. Her mother requests your presence in the blue drawing-room immediately. Alaric was moving before she finished speaking, brushing past the Earl without a backward glance. Crossing the great hall with long strides, he ignored the curious eyes of guests who parted before his evident urgency. The blue drawing-room, a smaller chamber used for intimate gatherings, was mercifully empty save for Mrs. Merryn, who stood wringing her hands by the settee where Lyra lay, pale as marble against blue velvet. "What has happened?" Alaric demanded, crossing to kneel beside her. "She complained of dizziness during the cotillion," Mrs. Merryn explained, her voice trembling, then nearly fainted. "The doctor has been summoned, but I am perfectly well," Lyra interrupted, attempting to sit up despite her evident weakness. "Merely overwarm from dancing. Please, Your Grace, do not trouble yourself on my account." "Nonsense," he replied, taking her hand without regard for propriety. It was cold to the touch, the pulse at her wrist fluttering like a trapped bird. "Mrs. Winters, send for hot tea and blankets. Mrs. Merryn, please sit before you collapse yourself." Taking charge seemed to steady both women. As Mrs. Winters hurried to obey, Alaric maintained his hold on Lyra's hand, studying her face with growing concern. Her eyes, though bright with embarrassment, appeared unfocused, and a sheen of perspiration dotted her brow despite her chilled skin. "This is more than dancing in a warm room," he said quietly. "Tell me truly, Lyra. Have you been ill before this?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Small spells of weakness these past weeks. Nothing serious. I thought perhaps the excitement of—" She trailed off, color rising briefly in her pale cheeks. "Of our courtship?" he finished, surprising himself with the tenderness in his voice. "Of everything," she amended, her gaze dropping. "The invitations, the visits, the expectations. I did not wish to disappoint anyone." The admission pierced Alaric more deeply than he could have anticipated. Had he been so blind to her struggle, so consumed with lineage and legacy that he failed to see the woman herself faltering. "You should rest," he said, reluctantly releasing her hand as Mrs. Winters returned with tea and blankets. "Your parents should take you home as soon as the doctor has seen you." "But your announcement," she began, distress evident in her voice. Everyone can continue to speculate," he interrupted firmly. "Your health takes precedence over social theatre." As he rose to make arrangements for the doctor's arrival, Alaric caught sight of Lady Isolde hovering near the doorway, her expression alight with undisguised curiosity. Beyond her stood Lady Caroline and the Earl, their faces twin masks of calculation. Alaric straightened to his full height, the mantle of his position settling upon him with new purpose. "Mrs. Winters, please ensure Miss Merrin's privacy is respected absolutely. No visitors except the doctor and her parents." "Yes, Your Grace." The housekeeper moved efficiently to close the doors, but not before Alaric heard Lady Isolde's carrying whisper. How convenient, this sudden illness. Perhaps she learned of his Grace's true intentions toward Lady Caroline. The malice in those words, the eager cruelty beneath their veneer of concern, crystallized something in Alaric's mind. This was the society whose approval he had valued above his own judgment, a nest of vipers, feeding on misfortune and delighting in downfall. The doctor arrived within the half-hour, examining Lyra behind closed doors, while Alaric paced the corridor outside. When the physician emerged, his expression was grave. "Miss Merrin appears to be suffering from nervous exhaustion, Your Grace, not uncommon in young ladies during their first season, but potentially serious if not addressed. I have recommended complete rest and a fortnight's retreat from all social engagements. She will have whatever she requires," Alaric responded. "I shall make arrangements for their carriage immediately." As the Merrin family prepared for departure, society buzzed with speculation. The harvest ball continued in their absence, guests dancing and dining while rumors multiplied like shadows in the candlelight. Alaric moved among them mechanically, his thoughts elsewhere. Near midnight, after seeing the Merrins safely away, he returned to find the Earl waiting at the foot of the grand staircase. "You have missed the traditional moment for your announcement," his godfather observed. "An unfortunate development, though perhaps fortuitous. Lady Caroline's father arrives tomorrow. A private breakfast meeting could be arranged, and a more modest announcement prepared for the County Gazette." Alaric regarded the older man with new clarity. "There will be no announcement regarding Lady Caroline tomorrow or ever. Don't be hasty, boy. Think of what you're sacrificing." "I have thought of nothing else for weeks." Alaric's voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable authority of his position. "And I now see clearly what truly matters." The Earl's expression darkened. "The Merrin girl? After tonight's display of weakness? A duchess must have constitution as well as character, Alaric. What if she cannot bear the strain of childbearing? What becomes of your line then? My concern at present is not for my line, but for Lyra herself." The truth of this statement resonated within Alaric with surprising force. "As for your threats regarding her family's past, do what you must. I find I care far less for society's opinion than I once believed." Leaving his godfather speechless, Alaric ascended the staircase to address his remaining guests. The ball would continue as planned, though its host now saw the glittering assembly through different eyes. Eyes opened by a woman who valued sincerity above cold perfection, and who had collapsed under the weight of expectations never meant for human hearts to bear. Tomorrow he would send roses to Willowbrook Manor, along with a letter containing words he had never imagined writing, words of concern not for legacy or lineage, but for Lyra herself. And perhaps, if she would permit it, he would follow in person, to speak of things more meaningful than dynastic alliances. The clock struck midnight as he re-entered the ballroom, its chime marking not an announcement of betrothal, but the death of one Duke of Harrowmere and the birth of another, a man awakening to the possibility that love might be the greatest legacy of all. 3 weeks passed before Lyra was deemed well enough to receive visitors. Throughout her convalescence, Alaric had sent daily inquiries, along with books from his library and flowers from the Eldridge greenhouses. Each delivery carried a personal note, brief at first, then gradually lengthening into genuine correspondence as convention gave way to connection. On a crisp October morning, Alaric's carriage finally turned up the drive to Willowbrook Manor. Though modest compared to Eldridge Court, the Merrin home possessed a warmth that struck him anew as he approached. Golden stone glowing in autumn sunlight, ivy framing windows like natural portraits. This was a house designed for living, not merely for impressing. Mr. Merrin greeted him in the entrance hall, his manner cordial if reserved. "Your Grace, welcome." Lyra awaits you in the garden room. She insisted on rising for your visit, despite our reservations. I would not wish to tax her strength, Alaric replied, suddenly uncertain. Perhaps another day would be more prudent. The older man studied him with unexpected perception. My daughter has anticipated your visit with great eagerness, Your Grace. I believe your absence would prove more taxing than your presence. Following Mr. Merrin through the house, Alaric noted touches that spoke of Lyra's influence. Fresh flowers arranged with artistic simplicity, books left open as if in mid-conversation, a shawl draped carelessly across a chair. Eldridge Court, for all its grandeur, possessed no such evidence of actual habitation. The garden room proved to be a charming conservatory, overlooking autumnal grounds. Lyra sat in a wicker chair by the windows, wrapped in a blue shawl, despite the room's warmth. Her face, turned toward the gardens, showed the pallor of recent illness. Yet when she heard their approach, the smile that illuminated her features transformed weakness into radiance. Your Grace, she said, attempting to rise. Please, remain seated, Alaric urged, crossing to her side with swift strides. And I think perhaps after all our correspondence, you might call me Alaric. Mr. Merrin discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone in the sunlit room. For a moment, neither spoke. Alaric found himself searching her face for signs of recovery, cataloguing each detail, the shadows beneath her eyes, the slight hollowing of her cheeks, yet also the unmistakable spark of intelligence that illness had not dimmed. You look better than I feared, he finally said, taking a seat opposite her. And you look exactly as I remembered, she replied, her smile turning wry. Though perhaps there is something different about your eyes. My eyes? They see me now, she said simply. Not merely a potential duchess, but me. The observation, so characteristic of her directness, caught him between surprise and recognition. I believe they began to see you the moment you played Bach in the music room, though it has taken me considerably longer to understand what I was seeing. Her fingers moved unconsciously to the pendant at her throat, the same one she had worn at the harvest ball. And what do you see now, Alaric? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had acknowledged during their proper courtship. Alaric considered his answer carefully, aware that this moment would shape whatever came after. I see a woman of uncommon perception and grace, he began slowly, one who values sincerity above appearance, and who sees beauty where others perceive only utility. I see someone who has endured society's cruelties and emerged with kindness intact. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. And I see the person with whom I wish to share not merely a name or a title, but a life. Lyra's eyes widened, her breath catching visibly. Even knowing what you now know about my family's history, the Earl made no secret of his disapproval at the ball. Lady Caroline made her expectations equally clear. The Earl speaks for a world I increasingly find hollow, Alaric replied, surprising himself with the vehemence of his conviction. As for Lady Caroline, her expectations are irrelevant to my intentions. And what are your intentions precisely? Lyra asked, her directness both challenge and invitation. Instead of answering immediately, Alaric rose and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. They were cool to the touch, delicate yet strong, hands that created music and meaning where there had been silence. My intention, Lyra Merrin, is to ask you to become my wife, not because you would make a suitable duchess, though you would surpass all expectations in that regard, not because your dowry would strengthen Eldridge's foundations, though practicalities need not be entirely dismissed. His voice softened. But because when you collapsed at the ball whispering my name, I discovered that all considerations of lineage and legacy meant nothing compared to the fear of losing you. Lyra's eyes filled with tears that trembled but did not fall. For you heard me then. When I fell, I heard you, he confirmed. And in that moment I heard myself as well. The voice I had been silencing beneath duty and expectation. She withdrew one hand from his grasp, touching his cheek with wondering fingers. They say the Duke of Harrowmere never shows emotion in public, yet I saw your face as consciousness left me. The Duke of Harrowmere died that night, Alaric said quietly. The man who emerged cares far less for what they say, and far more for what is true. A single tear escaped, trailing down Lyra's pale cheek. And what is true, Alaric? That I love you. The words, never before spoken in his adult life, emerged with surprising ease, not as a possession or an ornament or a means to an end, but as the person who awakened me to possibilities beyond duty, who showed me that legacy without love is merely empty inheritance. Lyra's composure finally broke, tears flowing freely now. I have loved you since you first visited Willowbrook, she confessed. Not the Duke with his title and lands, but the man who looked at my father's modest library and spoke of books with genuine reverence. The man whose eyes softened when he thought no one was watching. Alaric captured her hand against his cheek, turning to press a kiss to her palm. Then you will marry me, despite my arrogance and blind adherence to tradition, despite the scandal that may come when the Earl makes good on his threats to expose your grandfather's past? If you will have me despite my common blood and fragile constitution, she countered, despite the whispers that will surely follow a duke who marries for love rather than advantage. Let them whisper, Alaric said firmly. Eldridge Court has stood for centuries. It can withstand gossip. Lyra laughed then, the sound like music in the sunlit room. How shocked Lady Isolde will be. She told my mother at the ball that you were merely using me to make Lady Caroline jealous. Lady Isolde understands neither jealousy nor love, Alaric replied, rising to his feet, but maintaining his hold on Lyra's hands. May I speak to your father today, or would you prefer to wait until your health is fully restored? Speak to him, she urged, though he will insist on a proper engagement period. Papa is progressive in many ways, but he maintains certain traditions. As do I, now that I have re-examined which ones truly matter. Alaric hesitated, then added, There is one more thing you should know before you commit yourself fully. Concern flickered across Lyra's face. What is it? I have written to Lady Harrington declining any connection with Lady Caroline. I have also informed the Earl that I will not be intimidated by threats regarding your family's history. His expression hardened momentarily. In fact, I have taken steps to address that history directly. A portion of the Harrowmere fortune will establish a foundation for the education of disadvantaged children, including those descended from West Indies labourers. Lyra's expression transformed from concern to wonder. You would do this? Acknowledge the past so openly? The only shame lies in denial, not in making amends, Alaric replied. Your grandfather understood this when he divested from the sugar trade and supported abolition. I merely follow his example, albeit belatedly. Fresh tears welled in Lyra's eyes, but her smile was radiant. And they call you cold, Your Grace. A misapprehension I hope you will help me correct, he murmured, raising her hand to his lips. Starting with accepting this. From his pocket, Alaric withdrew not a ring, that would come later, with proper ceremony, but a small golden key. The key to the music room at Eldridge Court, he explained. Its first occupant in a generation, the beginning of our legacy, if you will. Lyra accepted the key with trembling fingers, closing her hand around it, as if it contained not just metal, but meaning. A legacy of music and books and growing things, she whispered, of children raised to value sincerity above appearance, of love above duty, Alaric added softly, though the two need not always stand opposed. As autumn sunlight streamed through the glass, highlighting strands of gold in Lyra's hair, Alaric felt the weight of 7 generations watching, not with disapproval, as he had once feared, but perhaps with recognition. For what was the purpose of preserving a name, if not to attach it to something worth remembering? The ancient oak at Eldridge Court had witnessed centuries of Vanes pursuing position and power. Now it would witness something rarer, a duke who discovered that the greatest legacy was not a title passed through blood, but a life transformed through love. The Earl of Westmoreland made good on his threat sooner than expected. 2 days after Alaric's proposal, the County Gazette published a lengthy article detailing the Merrin family's questionable origins and commercial entanglements. Though carefully worded to avoid outright libel, the piece left readers in no doubt that Miss Lyra Merrin's grandfather had profited from morally dubious enterprises in the West Indies. Alaric, reading the article over breakfast, felt anger rise like bile in his throat. Yet beneath the fury lay something unexpected, relief. The worst had happened. The shadow had emerged into daylight where it could be confronted directly rather than whispered about behind closed doors. Your instructions regarding today's correspondence, Your Grace? Blackwood inquired, hovering at his elbow. Prepare 2 letters immediately, Alaric replied, setting aside the Gazette. First, to the editor, requesting space for a response of equal prominence in tomorrow's edition. Second, to Mr. Merrin, inviting the family to dine at Eldridge Court this evening. He paused, then added, and cancel my lifetime subscription to this publication. By mid-morning, responses to the invitations had arrived. The editor, eager to avoid offending the most powerful man in the county, readily agreed to publish whatever statement the Duke provided. Mr. Merrin's reply was more complex, acceptance of the dinner invitation. coupled with a note suggesting that perhaps the engagement announcement should be delayed until the current scandal subsided. Alaric penned his response personally. The only delay shall be that required for propriety and your daughter's full recovery. Shadows gain power only when we retreat from them. That evening, as the Merrin carriage approached Eldridge Court, Lyra gazed out at the ancient edifice with mingled emotion. The grand facade remained as imposing as ever, yet now she saw beyond its stone solemnity to the possibility of warmth within. Beside her, her parents maintained careful composure, though their strained expressions revealed the toll of the day's revelations. "Perhaps father is right," she murmured. "A postponement would allow time for society to forget." "Society forgets nothing," her father replied gravely. "It merely finds fresh scandals to occupy its attention. The question is whether the Duke's resolve will withstand the storm." As if in answer, the great doors opened and Alaric himself descended the steps to greet them, an unprecedented breach of protocol that spoke volumes about his priorities. He assisted Lyra personally from the carriage, his hand steady beneath her elbow. "You look stronger today," he observed quietly. "Righteous indignation proves remarkably restorative," she replied with a faint smile. The dinner that followed was intimate by Eldridge standards, just the four of them in the smaller dining room, rather than the vast state chamber. Throughout the meal, Alaric spoke not of scandal or society's reaction, but of practical matters: the wedding date, renovation plans for the Duchess's suite, Lyra's preferences regarding household staff. His calm certainty gradually eased the tension, until even Mr. Merrin's rigid posture relaxed somewhat. Over dessert, however, the elder Merrin finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Your Grace, while we appreciate your steadfastness, we cannot ignore the potential consequences to your position. The Earl wields considerable influence, and Lady Caroline's family connections extend to the highest circles." "Let them extend where they will," Alaric replied evenly. "Eldridge Court stands on its own foundations, as do I." "And the Gazette article? The insinuations about my father's business?" Alaric set down his wineglass with deliberate care. "Tomorrow's edition will carry my response. Would you care to see it now?" From an inner pocket, he withdrew several sheets of parchment, covered in his precise handwriting. Rather than passing them to Mr. Merrin, however, he rose and moved to stand beside Lyra's chair. "With your permission," he said, meeting her eyes, "as it concerns your family's honor as much as my own." At her nod, Alaric began to read. "To the editor and citizens of Harrowmere County, recent publication regarding the Merrin family's historical connections requires clarification not through denial, but through context and commitment to truth. It is accurate that Harold Merrin, grandfather to Miss Lyra Merrin, inherited interests in West Indies sugar plantations through his first marriage. Upon learning the true nature of conditions on those plantations, he divested all such holdings and dedicated substantial portions of his fortune to abolition efforts, facts conveniently omitted from yesterday's account. As Duke of Harrowmere, I find not shame but honor in aligning with a family who faced moral complexity with courage and restitution. Indeed, I announce today the establishment of the Harrowmere Merrin Educational Trust, which will provide schooling for disadvantaged children throughout the Empire, with particular focus on descendants of those who labored in West Indies plantations. Further, I confirm my betrothal to Miss Lyra Merrin, to be formalized upon completion of an appropriate courtship period, with marriage to follow in the spring. Any who find this union objectionable are welcome to absent themselves from the celebration, and indeed from Harrowmere society henceforth. The Vane family motto, "Endure and Prevail," has traditionally referred to standing firm against external forces. I now interpret it as equally applicable to confronting uncomfortable truths within our own history and privilege. True nobility lies not in denying the past, but in creating a more honorable future. Respectfully, Alaric Vane, Duke of Harrowmere. Silence followed his reading, broken only by the gentle tick of the mantel clock. Mrs. Merrin dabbed surreptitiously at her eyes, while her husband stared at Alaric with an expression caught between disbelief and respect. Lyra, however, rose slowly from her chair and faced Alaric directly. "You would stake your reputation on this? Publicly acknowledge not just our connection, but your intention to address historical wrongs?" "I would," he confirmed, holding her gaze steadily, "though I consider it less a stake and more an investment in the legacy we discussed, one of substance rather than mere appearance." "The Earl will never forgive such a public rebuke," Mr. Merrin warned. "Then I shall bear that loss along with whatever social consequences follow," Alaric replied, returning the letter to his pocket. though I suspect many will privately admire what they publicly condemn. Hypocrisy remains society's most consistent feature. Later that evening, as the Merrins prepared to depart, Alaric requested a moment alone with Lyra in the music room. There, beneath the gaze of stern ancestors in gilded frames, he presented her with a small velvet box. "This is improper," she protested even as she accepted it. "We are not yet formally engaged. Consider it an early betrothal gift," he suggested, watching as she opened the box to reveal not jewelry, but a delicate iron key, ancient and ornate. The key to the North Tower. It houses the oldest part of the Eldridge Library, volumes dating back to the first Duke's time. Lyra touched the key reverently. "Why this gift specifically?" "Because when I asked what you sought in the library during your first visit, you said voices from the past. These books contain such voices, some noble, some flawed, all human." Alaric took her hand, closing her fingers around the key. "I want you to know all of Eldridge's history, not just its public face, just as I wish to know all of your family's story, shadow and light alike." Tears brightened her eyes, though they did not fall. "Most men seek to protect their intended from unpleasant realities. I am learning that protection can become its own form of imprisonment," he replied. "I would rather face reality together, no matter how unpleasant, than preserve illusions separately." As the Merrin carriage disappeared down the long drive, Alaric stood on the steps of Eldridge Court, watching until the lanterns were swallowed by darkness. Tomorrow would bring the Gazette's publication of his letter, and with it, undoubtedly, fresh waves of scandal and speculation. Lady Isolde would be beside herself with excitement. Lady Caroline would nurse wounded pride beneath perfect composure. The Earl would fume and threaten further revelations. Yet for the first time in his adult life, Alaric found himself looking forward to tomorrow, not with calculated anticipation of advantage, but with genuine curiosity about possibilities. The Duke of Harrowmere had publicly chosen love over lineage, substance over appearance, truth over convenient fiction. The ancient oak that had witnessed generations of Vanes pursuing status and security would now observe something unprecedented. A duke who discovered that the truest form of nobility had nothing to do with birth and everything to do with courage. As Alaric turned to re-enter Eldridge Court, the portrait gallery seemed less imposing than before. His ancestors' stern expressions now appeared not judging but expectant, as if they too had waited for a Vane who would challenge not just external threats, but the limitations of their own traditions. The Duke of Harrowmere retired that night, not to the master chamber that had housed 7 generations of his forebears, but to the east wing suite that overlooked the ancient oak. From there he could see moonlight silvering branches that had endured centuries of storms, yet still reached ever upward, nature's testament to the possibility of both endurance and growth. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight brought peace in the certainty that whatever legacy he and Lyra created together would be one worth inheriting, not merely in name and property, but in values that transcended both. Spring arrived at Eldridge Court with unprecedented vibrancy. Gardeners who had tended the formal grounds for decades marveled at the profusion of color, now softening the estate's austere facade. Traditional roses still lined the main drive, but wildflowers now flourished in meadows once ruthlessly manicured, and the kitchen gardens had expanded to include experimental plots, where Lyra tested varieties from across the empire. The Duke and Duchess of Harrowmere had been married precisely 1 month, in a ceremony notable for both its adherence to tradition and its subtle departures from convention. The cathedral had been filled to capacity despite, or perhaps because of, the scandal that had preceded the union. Society might disapprove in private, but few could resist witnessing such a dramatic culmination to the season's most talked-about courtship. Lady Isolde had attended, of course, her expression caught between disapproval and fascination, as Lyra processed down the aisle in a gown of unconventional simplicity. The Earl of Westmoreland had declined his invitation, as had Lady Caroline, though rumours suggested she had already secured a more advantageous match with an elderly marquess in need of an heir. The absence of these once influential figures had scarcely been noticed amid the genuine celebration that followed. Now, on a perfect May morning, Lyra stood in the music room that had once been silent for a generation. Sunshine streamed through newly cleaned windows, illuminating the pianoforte where she sat surrounded by scattered sheet music. Her fingers moved over the keys with increasing confidence, no longer hesitant in this space that had become truly hers. Alaric appeared in the doorway, pausing to observe his wife unnoticed. Marriage had transformed them both in ways neither had fully anticipated. Lyra had blossomed in her role as Duchess, bringing warmth and purpose to rooms long maintained merely for appearance. Alaric had discovered reserves of patience and flexibility previously untapped, particularly when confronting the inevitable resistance to their more progressive initiatives. "Back again?" he inquired, finally making his presence known. Lyra looked up with a smile that still caught him unprepared with its radiance. "Beethoven today. I'm expanding my repertoire, as you have expanded everything you touch at Eldridge." He crossed to sit beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. "The trustees have approved the first scholarships for the Educational Trust. 10 children will begin their studies in September. "Including the Cooper boy from the village?" Lyra asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Especially the Cooper boy. His examination results were exceptional." She leaned against him briefly, a gesture of affection that had become natural between them. "And what of the Earl's latest salvo? I saw his letter arrive this morning." Alaric's expression tightened momentarily. His godfather's campaign of subtle undermining had continued unabated, though its effectiveness diminished with each passing month. "He suggests our presence would be disruptive at Lady Montgomery's summer musicale. Apparently, certain guests have expressed reservations about socializing with us." "And does this trouble you?" Lyra asked, her fingers idly tracing a melody on the keys. "Less than I would have expected," Alaric admitted. "Though I confess, I do occasionally miss certain aspects of society. The political connections, the business opportunities, the desserts at Claridge's," he replied with unexpected humor. "No one makes a trifle like their chef." Lyra laughed, the sound echoing through the room that had known only silence for so long. "Then we shall create our own society, one that values substance over appearance, beginning with finding a cook who can rival Claridge's trifle." "Already arranged," Alaric revealed. "I've secured the services of a French pâtissier who trained under their head chef. He arrives next week." "You think of everything," she said fondly. "Not everything," he countered, his expression growing serious. "I never thought I would find myself happier in semi-exile from the world I once considered essential. I never imagined that fulfilling my duty to Harrowmere would come through defying its traditions rather than maintaining them." Lyra turned fully toward him, her hands leaving the keys to rest on his. "And do you regret any of it? The scandal, the broken connections, the whispers that still follow us in certain circles?" "Not for a moment," he replied without hesitation, "though I do wonder sometimes what our children will face because of our choices." The word hung between them. Children, the expected continuation of the Harrowmere line, the legacy that had once been Alaric's only consideration in marriage. Lyra's expression softened, a secret knowledge illuminating her features. "I believe they will face life with courage and compassion," she said quietly, "with an understanding that true nobility comes from character rather than circumstance, and with parents who chose love despite every pressure to choose otherwise." Something in her tone made Alaric study her more closely. "You speak with remarkable confidence about these hypothetical children." "Perhaps not entirely hypothetical," she replied, color rising in her cheeks. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday, though it is early days yet. By winter, Eldridge Court will welcome its next generation." Joy cascaded through Alaric with unexpected force, not the calculated satisfaction he had once anticipated at securing an heir, but boundless happiness at creating new life with the woman he loved. Without words, he gathered Lyra into his arms, holding her with tender reverence. "Are you pleased?" she whispered against his shoulder. "Beyond any capacity to express it," he answered, his voice rough with emotion. "Though I find I care not whether we have a son or daughter, so long as the child has your heart and spirit. And your strength," Lyra added, drawing back to meet his gaze, "your courage to stand firm when it matters most." Later that afternoon, they walked together through the gardens, past formal parterres and newly planted wildflower meadows, to the ancient oak that had witnessed centuries of Harrowmere history. Its massive trunk bore the carved initials of generations of Vanes, some now almost absorbed by the tree's relentless growth. "I used to view this tree as a symbol of permanence," Alaric mused, his hand resting on the weathered bark. "Now I see it as a testament to adaptation. It has survived storms and droughts not by remaining unchangeable, but by growing continuously in response to its environment." "Like the Harrowmere line itself," Lyra observed, leaning against him as they contemplated the towering canopy above. "Strong not because it resists change, but because it embraces it when necessary." Alaric's hand moved to rest protectively over her still flat stomach, where their child grew, the next Duke or Duchess of Harrowmere, who would inherit not just lands and titles, but the legacy of parents who had redefined nobility for their generation. The news of Lyra's pregnancy spread quickly through the county, met with a mixture of genuine congratulations and thinly veiled speculation about whether the child would inherit the mother's common tendencies, along with the father's aristocratic bearing. Lady Isolde was overheard at a tea party, suggesting that the Duke had certainly wasted no time in securing his primary objective, while the Earl let it be known through careful intermediaries that he remained concerned about the dilution of the Vane bloodline. Yet such whispers held diminishing power over the residents of Eldridge Court. The educational trust flourished, the first scholars already making remarkable progress under tutors selected for ability rather than connections. The Harrowmere tenants found themselves benefiting from agricultural innovations that increased yields while improving working conditions. The great house itself hummed with renewed purpose, its rooms filled with music and conversation after generations of echoing silence. 6 months into Lyra's pregnancy, as autumn painted the Eldridge grounds in russet and gold, an unexpected visitor arrived. The Earl of Westmoreland's carriage appeared on the drive one crisp morning, its occupant visibly aged since his last confrontation with his godson. Alaric received him in the library, where Lyra had been cataloguing the North Tower's ancient volumes. She made to withdraw, but the Earl raised a hand to stay her. "I would speak with you both," he said, his voice lacking its former authoritative ring, "if you would permit an old man his dignity despite his errors." What followed was not quite an apology, but something perhaps more valuable, a recognition that the world was changing, and that the Harrowmere-Merrin union represented not degradation, but evolution of aristocratic values. The Earl spoke of conversations at court, where the king himself had expressed interest in the educational trust's model, and of subtle shifts in society's attitude toward the couple who had defied convention yet upheld deeper principles. "I find myself reconsidering certain fixed positions," the Earl concluded, his gaze moving between Alaric and Lyra. "Perhaps legacy is indeed more complex than mere bloodlines." The reconciliation remained tentative, complicated by history and pride on both sides. Yet as the Earl departed, having formally requested to be considered as the child's godfather, Lyra and Alaric stood together on the steps of Eldridge Court, with the sense that another bridge had been built between past and future. That evening, as twilight softened the estate's contours, they sat together in the music room, Lyra's hands resting on keys that now responded to her touch like old friends. Her condition had rendered certain notes difficult to reach, but she played with the sincerity that had first captured Alaric's attention all those months ago. "What shall we name this child?" she asked during a pause, her hand moving to the prominent curve of her belly, where their future visibly grew. Alaric considered the question with uncharacteristic whimsy. "If a girl, perhaps Harmony, for what you have brought to Eldridge Court. If a boy, perhaps Valor, not for battlefield courage, but for the bravery to choose one's own path. Or perhaps something simpler," Lyra suggested with a smile. "A name that carries its own weight without predetermined expectations. A clear page upon which they may write their own story." "As we have written ours," Alaric agreed, his hand joining hers over the life they had created together, a story of a duke who wanted a legacy, not a wife, until she collapsed before the court, whispering his name, and awakened him to the truth, Lyra finished softly, that the greatest legacy is love itself. Outside, the ancient oak stood sentinel as darkness fell, its branches reaching toward stars that had witnessed countless human dramas unfold beneath their distant light. Within its rings lay the record of 7 generations of Vanes who had preserved name and title through calculation and duty. Now it would record something new, a duke and duchess who discovered that true nobility flowed not through veins, but through choices, and that legacy was measured not in land or titles, but in lives transformed by courage and compassion. And as winter turned to spring once more, the cry of a newborn child echoed through chambers long awaiting such music, the first notes in a composition still being written, a legacy of love just beginning to unfold. In the quietest moments, between grandeur and duty, lies the most profound revelation. That legacy is not what we leave behind, but what we bring to life through love. The Duke and Lyra's journey reminds us that true nobility exists not in bloodlines or titles, but in the courage to choose authenticity over expectation. We all face this choice, between the paths others have charted for us and the calling of our own hearts. Society may whisper its judgments, tradition may pull with ancient hands, but the soul recognizes its true inheritance, the capacity to love beyond boundaries, to grow despite limitations, to stand firm when conventions falter. Like the ancient oak at Eldridge Court, we are shaped by both roots and reaching, honoring what came before while growing toward what might be. Our most meaningful legacy is not in names preserved or fortunes amassed, but in hearts awakened and lives transformed by the simple revolutionary act of choosing love when duty would have us choose otherwise. Did this story touch your heart? Subscribe now to journey through more tales of transformation and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What legacy would you choose to build in your own life? Remember, every great story deserves to be heard, just as every great love deserves to be witnessed.